welcome to Paperback Flicks.
All right, hey guys, welcome back to another Paperback Flicks. I am Ruth Craddock. I'm with my host somewhere, Rae Davidson, and we have a special guest, D.W. Lundberg of
NostalgiaCast.
How did I forget
She
the name
forgot
of
the
my
name
husband?
of her own husband's podcast.
Yeah.
We're off to a good start.
How did that happen?
You remember that this is called Paperback Flicks, though, right?
I did.
Okay.
See, that you know where my priorities are.
We're on the right feet. We're on the right foot. Okay. Hi, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So, what did you choose for us to cover today?
I chose a book on dentistry. No, just kidding. It's a book on a giant killer shark called Jaws. I think some people have heard of at least the movie. Right, Ruth?
Yeah, at least. All right. So, what did you see or read first?
Well, I saw the movie first. I think we've talked about it on our podcast before.
Mhm.
Jaws was the movie that got me addicted to movies. So I'm an only child, and my dad died when I was 2, and so my mom would go out and work, and she would leave me with movies. And Jaws was the first movie that I just got absolutely addicted to. And the thing was, when you watch it as a 5 or 6-year-old, I didn't understand why the movie scared me like it did. I didn't understand why I identified with the Brody character so much. I didn't understand why. I don't know. I just felt so enraptured by the movie that's when I started investigating what movies were. And Stephen Spielberg was the first director's name that I learned, and Roy Scheider and Richard Dreyfuss, Robert Shaw were the first actors that I learned. And so I learned all about cinematography, all about music. That's how I was introduced and fell in love with John Williams. So yeah, that's where the love all came from. And just ever since then, I've been addicted. So I don't know if I'd call Jaws my favorite movie of all time. There's movies that probably are more rich emotionally, but like I think Jaws, I've seen it more than any other movie. If I was really to log it on Letterboxd or whatever, like I've memorized the movie from front to back. It's just something that I fell in love with, and I'm just, every time I watch it or even think about it, I fall more in love with it. So yeah.
Cool. All right.
Oh, I was gonna say, so I had listened to a couple nostalgia casts, and I will admit, listening to podcasts is not my speed. I don't do it very often. But then you guys started doing video, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those, like, I that's more my speed. Okay. And so I watched a bunch of them, and you do bring up Jaws fairly often.
Yeah.
And you were saying something about like not being able, like any water that you can't see all around you, or things can come in, or whatever it was. But like, I have that same fear. We talked about it with the Sleepy Hollow episode. I'm not scared of the dark. I'm scared of what could be in the dark that I can't see.
Yes.
And it's the same thing with the water and the concept of sharks in the water. Like, but yeah, when you said that, when you're like, I'm scared of water that I can't see what's coming at me or whatever, I'm like, that's it.
Yeah. It's that primal fear, right, of not knowing what's around you, or being swallowed by something that just larger than you and you can't control. And again, I didn't understand how Spielberg was able to capture that in a movie and made me feel that fear and it's all very basic, but when you first get images in your brain, I just think that it just awakened a lot of senses, and so I owe it a lot.
So I kind of want to know what both of you, when you read the book, because we've all seen the movie, but when you read the book, did it kind of have that same like angst, or like, you know what I mean? Did it still like draw you in and give you that suspenseful feeling, or was it just a book about a fish?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a spoiler into what Ruth thought of the book, but
yeah, unfortunately.
the funny thing was, when I got addicted to Jaws, my mom, again, she just fed those obsessions, and so I didn't read the book for maybe a decade after I saw the movie, but I was so obsessed with it that on a weekly basis, I think we would go to like a book nook, like every weekend, and I would find a copy of Jaws, and she would buy it for me. So I had like 20 or 30 copies of Jaws, like, I guess so I wouldn't hurt the spine when I opened it and I read it. And anyway, so I collected however many copies of the book before I even read it. And then when I finally sat down and read it, we'll probably talk about it, but the opening obviously immersed me and got that. But then there was a bunch of stuff about class struggles, and there was a chapter devoted to a sexual tryst,
Mhm.
and there's stuff with the mafia. And as maybe what I was 10, 16, something like that, I didn't understand, like, what is this book? Like, why, you know, so I don't know. Like, to me, the book is simultaneously one of the worst things I've ever read and one of the most visceral things I've ever read, because Benchley, when he describes the fish, I think that's where his heart is. And so he's very poetic, and his language is just so, again, visceral and vivid. But then when it's characters sitting, the dialogue is so trite, and it, like, I don't know, it just feels like Benchley has never met a human being before in his life. Like, it's hard to process, like, this poetic about the shark and how the fin slices through the sea, the foam and stuff like that. With, like, there's a part where a guy from New York comes in, and, like, Brody's like, "Hey, you jerk, are you happy that a kid almost got killed?" And I'm like, nobody talks like this. Like, what?
It was
So
the
I don't know.
70s ish, right? Like, when did the book
Yeah.
come out? Do you know?
73, because I
Okay.
think it crossed. Spielberg was working for Zanuck and Brown, and it before the book was even out, they'd optioned the book, and so they saw it on his. He saw it on their desk. So it's
Mhm.
either
Yeah.
73 or 74. It had to be at least 73. But
Yeah.
yeah, obviously it's a morality tale and all that. I just think that, and we'll talk about it too, that sexual tryst part, it's interestingly written, and there are ideas that are interesting, but it goes on for so long that you're like, isn't this supposed to be a book about a shark? What's happening? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, like I said, it's simultaneously the worst and the best thing I've ever read. It's hard to explain.
You know, that's a high praise, because how can you do both at once? That's talent.
High trash, I guess you could call it. So,
Oh, you know, it's rich white trash, because that's something I
That's
didn't
right.
know. I didn't know that existed until the Simple Life show with Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie.
Mhm.
I didn't know it was possible to be rich and white trash at the same time until that show. I was like, oh, I thought you had to be poor to be white trash. Never mind.
Nope.
So, yeah. Anyways,
Oh my gosh.
I
So then I wasn't here when you guys, I hopped on a little late. So Ruth, what was the preview that he got?
well, he, you know, he's friends with my husband and all, and they text each other. And Johnny has no compulsion about just saying whatever I
No.
think to everybody, because he knows I would do that too. But so yeah, apparently they already talked about how I felt about the book
And I've
before.
been ruined for the past couple of days.
He's like, what?
Yeah.
So I like the book. I do agree that first scene is describing the girl dying and having it start with that. It's very intriguing, and I think he did a really great job with that part. So it really brings you in. I can get why you don't like class scenes, especially if, you know, you've never struggled with class issues. You've never been a poor person. You never had to deal with that snobbery. That's one of the things that really bugged me about the movie is they made him an outsider. And that was a huge part of Brody's personality in the book, was that he was a local and his wife was an outsider. She was upper class and he was, you know, middle class. And that was a huge dynamic in their relationship and his insecurities. And I found that very interesting, because that would be a really unusual dynamic, especially when they live in a beach town. Like, it's 3 months out of the year, has her past kind of rubbed in her face. Like, she's happy for life until all these uppity, you know, New Yorkers come back, and then she's like, oh yeah, I get to be one of them. And instead of being like, look at how pretentious they are, she's like, oh, I miss my life, I miss that. And that's one of the things that was interesting about, she's more interesting in the book for sure than the movie. She's just the wife, you know, and that gets boring. But I agree that the whole affair was written I thought written very well, but it was also very uncomfortable to be in that diner with them, and then like go off about fantasies. And I'm like, dude, how long is this gonna go?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I kept half expecting one of them to like wise up and like, oh, wait a second, what's going on here? What are we doing? This is retarded. And then they don't. I am glad they didn't take us to the bedroom with them per se. Like, she briefly mentions, you know, what, like, his expression after they first did it. But like, I am glad we didn't go to the bedroom with them. That was awkward enough being in the diner with them as they're explaining their weird sexual fantasies. And it's like, some of the things she said, like, isn't every woman's fantasy to be raped? And I'm like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about? Those people actually like love and affection. They're not into violence. So that's
it feels like a man in the 70s wrote it. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
you're right.
There's a lot of that in the book, the way that Benchley describes like the beach bunnies on the beach. And I was like, I don't need the description of like what they're wearing and things. And it's all over the book. There's a lot of misogyny and things like that it's all over. And again, I don't like, it's interesting. Like I said, I like that there's more depth to it. What I like about the movie is that Spielberg kind of stripped all that. It's a story about a shark. Like there's literally parts when they have that dinner party and it's built this whole thing where Brody's like upset because he's let these people die, right? Like they've bullied him into doing this, and then they're at this dinner party where Ellen is trying to impress Hooper and all these other rich people, the hippie girl or whatever.
And the hippie girl was weird.
The whole thing becomes about how Brody's so uncomfortable, and I'm like, did we forget that his whole story is like his guilt over killing these people? Because it doesn't even come up during that whole 20 or 30 page section, and I'm like, where are we losing the thread here? So I like the class struggle stuff. I just think that it goes on for so long that it's like, is this a story about a shark or is this a story about rich and poor people? It can't decide, because it goes on for so long. I don't know. It's just that there's nothing wrong with the book and a movie being completely different. I just think that for watching the movie first, you see all this other stuff and you're like, what does this have to do with anything? And it goes on for so, like, again, the affair thing, I thought it was really interesting how the whole thing is geared to Ellen trying to make Matt feel like a man. It talks about his virility and I need to let him pay for the bill because that it's geared toward my goal of us ending up in bed together, right? I thought that was really interesting, but I'm like, shouldn't this be in like a different book? I thought it would be a much better thing to and make that the whole point of a book, because after that she becomes an afterthought again until the mayor section. She's like, oh, well, yeah, my life is a lot better. And then it's like, well, okay. But it's like, it's not, it goes on for so long that you're like, all right, what is your point here?
Right. Well, and when he wrote, like, I don't know, I have a tendency to go down rabbit holes.
Sounds good.
With these different stories that we do. And, when he wrote it, like he says, he was apparently just sitting on a beach and he was literally like, I wonder how the story would go if there was just like a shark on a big vacation beach. Like that was how it all started. And so he thought, like, as he was writing everything out, he thought people aren't going to be entertained by this. And so he was putting things in that he thought would matter to that he thought the consumer wanted, basically.
Okay.
And
it worked, right?
Well, right. Well, so it became a big deal. I guess the book was a big deal for a while in there. And then when he had the manuscript written and Spielberg took it up, or whoever took it up, but he was writing, they had the basic manuscript, but they didn't actually have a script and a screenplay, and he was writing it and he was just like, I don't have it, dudes. I don't like, he went to Spielberg apparently at one point and he was like, I don't know how to make this movie the way that I would want to watch this movie. And that's when they got Gottlieb to come in. He's like, I want it to be fun. He's like, he apparently sent him what they had and he goes, just eviscerate this. I don't want to see a page without a note, or whatever. Yeah. And they were like, day by day, like they would be shooting stuff and then they would go home. They had a little cabin or something, cottage on the beach or whatever. And they would go back to the beach. And while everybody else is out partying, the actors are, doing whatever, they were trying to make like the script for the next day or whatever,
Interesting.
And so they could cut out. I like that they didn't need the affair, but also in the book, I like that Hooper got it. And the story on why he didn't get it in the movie is actually interesting too. But I was like, as much as I didn't like the affair, like you said, it was uncomfortable, it felt out of place. There was that when they're out there and she just has that like oh my gosh, I'm an awful person. Here I am, like, indulging in this, and he could be dead right now. Like, I could have just lost him forever. You know, what have I done? I'm glad that was there a little bit, you know, but I don't know. There was kind of that, like, I didn't like Hooper in the book.
No, not at
And
all.
so I was just like, oh, what's that? You got eaten by a shark?
And shot in the neck by yeah. I think Spielberg, when he wanted the shark to win because he hated everybody in the book. So on your podcast before, because like you talk about all the time how you're trying to reconcile, and this is what makes your podcast so great. Is you try to reconcile what a book is versus what a movie is, and all this stuff. Like for your Harry Potter episode, you're like, they're the Weasley twins. I wish there were more dialogue. It's like, yeah, but we can't put all the dialogue in, so you have to pick and choose stuff. I think, Ray, what you're talking about with Benchley saying, I don't got it, right? They took all this, because if you make a novel into a movie, it's going to be what, 5-6 hours, right? Spielberg kind of funneling it down and making it just about the shark. That's the 2-hour chunk of what's. And so he made it work, right? But there's also, like, going back to Benchley being like really tried as a writer, like the Mrs. Kittner confrontation, right? In the book, she goes into the office, she slaps Brody across the face, and it goes on for pages about his guilt. And he yells at her. And so, but in the movie, she just walks up, she slaps him, she says, you knew that this was going to happen. I just wanted you to know that. And she it's very quick, and it gets the same emotion across that it took Benchley 20 pages to do. I just think that visually you can do a lot more interesting things in a movie than you especially what Benchley did in the book.
Well, and they addressed the class issue like very briefly as well, which I appreciated in the movie. They're all laying out on the beach, and Ellen says, so when am I gonna be an Amity? When am I gonna be an Islander? And the lady, I forget her name,
never.
But she's like, never. You weren't born here. You're not one of us. Like, you're never part of us. You're swanky, and we're the, you know, like they address it. It's there. If you want to continue to see it, you continue to see it. But it wasn't the point of the movie. Like, rich or poor, snooty or local, you are shark food.
All shark food.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are. You're going to be.
He'll eat you either way.
Yeah, Chrissy's a grifter right at the beginning.
Yeah,
she's not even part of the town, and so it's literally like Amity swallows her up, spits her back out. Right. I mean, so that's all interesting, and the way that Benchley describes when she gets bit by the shark, and it's always stuck with me how she instinctively reaches down to where she knows her ankle is, and it's not there.
Not there.
And so she reaches up higher and just feels the bone. I'm like, that's very vivid writing, and it's great. It is. But again, I just don't think that he's a good enough writer to pull off all the richer stuff. You know what I mean? It doesn't. His heart and his gift is in the shark stuff, because it's very, like I said, it's poetic and visceral. But yeah, I just like how they took everything, because in the movie, the shark is a presence throughout the movie, and in the book, you forget sometimes that there's a shark that's even out there. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So from what I understand, he mainly writes things about sharks and ocean life and that kind of thing. That, like, most of his books are centered around that.
Yeah, he wrote this, and then he wrote a book called The Deep that was also made into a movie with Robert Shaw about sunken treasure. And then he wrote a terrible book called Beast, when he kept trying to write these other books and it never went anywhere. He wrote a book about a giant squid that's the same plot skeleton as Jaws. It's the exact same, and it's a terrible book. And then after he wrote that, he wrote a book about a shark that mutated into human form. It's like, what are you doing, man? But the thing that's interesting, though, is he wrote this book obviously to make money and support his family, and because of the book and because of the movie, sharks started being killed. Like, people will go out and hunt them, and they just became like more of an endangered, and he felt bad for that. Not that he was a preservationist who worked for PETA or anything, but he just felt bad that his book did this and gave these sharks a stigma. And you know, Ray, you and me, we share that love for sharks. They're so elegant, but they're terrifying, right? They're beautiful, but they're just awful. They're like the devil in the water or whatever. But he just felt that he had to kind of reinstate their image, and so that he became kind of a preservationist after. And so that's as bad of a writer he is. I think he's very honorable in what he was trying to do afterwards.
Yeah. I don't know. So I gotta completely disagree with you. I don't think he's a bad writer. I do agree that with all this other stuff in it, especially if you watch the movie first and you love the movie, you're gonna want to just get to the good stuff, get to the meat, and you're not gonna want all the extra fat that's hanging around. But I think because I'm not in love with the movie, I remember watching it maybe once or twice. I was never like I remember certain things vividly. Other things I apparently remembered wrong. And they're not how I remembered them at all. I was like, whoa, there's more nudity in this than I realized. Or it's not nearly as dark in the movie.
Did you see the TV version? Because I saw the edited for TV.
No, we watched it on like Prime, and we watched it with our oldest sons. And I was like, I'm sorry, I remember this being really dark, and there being like no side boob, and then even in the water I remember it being just very silhouetted, where it's actually they kept getting closer and closer. I'm like, dude, we're seeing way too much. So she's coming up from underneath her. I'm like, she's not wearing anything. Why couldn't she be wearing underwear at least? Like, I don't know, I guess she's some drifters don't wear bras in the 70s, so or underwear apparently.
Well, it's interesting, Ruth, though, because I've maybe seen this 100 times, so my love for it is much different. You know what I mean? Like, movies is subjective. And it's just like you're talking about, get to the good stuff. Like, again, I'm going to keep dropping like episodes, like your Princess Bride episode, how you were talking about how, oh, William Goldman's like aside. So just get to the stuff that I want. Like, that's good. It's the same thing for me with the book. It's like, this is interesting. I would rather have this Harlequin romance stuff be in a Harlequin romance. Not like I want to read it there. So get to the good stuff, man. So it's all subjective. So Ruth, I can't sit here and go, I can't believe you don't think Benchley's a horrible writer. Like, you need to side with me. I can't do that. And when I say he's bad,
the more you try to do that, the less likely I'm going to.
There you go. So, I just think he's bad at dialogue. I mean, he's terrible at dialogue. But the other language of the fish and things like that is beautiful. And so maybe, I'll track back. He's not like the worst writer, but he definitely could improve in a lot of things. So
Larry, and I don't know why. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I would agree in some places his dialogue isn't the best. So the whole thing with the hippie chick at the dinner party, she irritated the crap out of me. And like, I had the hardest time watching Brody just sit there and deal with it and be like, dude, you realize I'm the chief of police, right? I can literally arrest you for admitting that you have the stuff. Or I can find out where you live and then hunt you down and catch you with the stuff. Like, what are you doing? I thought the dinner party was interesting, again, like on the social dynamics, because it was meant to be like a way for Helen to get back into, is it Ellen or Helen? I keep saying it wrong. Ellen, thank you. Okay,
the H is silent.
But you're right. It's not even there. So Ellen is using this as a way to get back into her old society life, and then ends up being that the other like summer couple that she invited couldn't come. So then it just ends up being her, Brody, Hooper, the girl that she invited for Hooper because Brody insisted, and then Meadows and his wife. And that's the other thing that kind of bothers me about the movie, is that I really liked Meadows. I really liked his character. I thought he was very interesting. I liked the dynamic between him and Brody. I liked the relationship between Brody and the mayor, especially when it came out with all this, mafia stuff behind the scenes. I thought that was very interesting. I thought that was added a really neat dynamic to it. I thought that just made it more like there's more stakes. There's more things going on here than just what's going on in the ocean. And it focused more on like the harm that's being done to this town. And like how when people are desperate, they stop thinking rationally. They stop thinking about human life. They stop thinking about what's right and wrong. They're thinking about, I've got to feed my family. So it just kind of shows how people's priorities change when their livelihood is threatened versus there might be a shark out there, but I need to eat. So I need to feed my kids. So we're going to run the risk that there might be a shark out there because that's not possible. It's not likely. They're thinking of the shark like, lightning striking, where it's more that this guy just decided there's good food here and I'm just going to hang. So I don't know. I liked all the dynamics of the town and all that extra pressure that's put on Brody. So for me, the book is more about Brody than the movie is. The movie sort of takes some of those interesting points. Like, it shows that he's afraid of water and then has him slowly, gradually overcome it because he has to, so he can defeat this fish and he can save his town and make the wrongs of the past right. But there's so much more of that in the book. And I think ultimately the book is really more, it's not it's more Brody versus the shark than the shark versus the town. And in the movie, it's the shark versus the world.
Humanity,
it doesn't feel as much about Brody as it does in the book. And one of my problems with the movie is just how hectic it is. Like, so they have their town meeting and everyone's all like, it's like really annoying. I don't know any town hall meetings where people are that loud for that long and they don't stop and listen to the people at all. Like the presenters, the authorities that are trying to talk and lead the thing. So that felt, I know he's trying to go for something like authentic or like organic, but I didn't feel like that was natural at all. And it was just weird. And they had a couple different places in the movie where they did that. I do love the whole scratching on the chalkboard in the movie because I forgot that that's where that whole thing comes from, is from this movie, and it's been made fun of in plenty of other things. And so I'm like, oh yeah, that's this movie. And it was an interesting way to introduce the captain without like condensing it in a way in which, how are we going to introduce this guy without going into all this background stuff? And so as much as I don't like it, I also do like it because it makes sense in a movie that this is how you would introduce.
Yeah.
That
so
guy.
I will say for the book, I do, like I said, I don't like Hopper in the book. The difference with the movie
Hooper,
is I don't care about him in the movie. Like, he's kind of nothing. And actually Richard Dreyfuss said the same thing. He actually is interviewed just before the movie comes out, or possibly just before the movie comes out, or just after, I don't remember. But he was like, it's garbage. They were like, oh, here's a character to get us from point A to point B. They gave me nothing. I think I did a bad job on this movie because I was given a bad job for this movie.
I don't think he did a bad job. Like, yeah,
I didn't think so either. That's what he thought. And at the time, and then they have an interview of him like decades later, I don't know. And he's like, well, obviously I'm an idiot. Like,
it was a big movie for me. So,
well, nobody thought this movie was going to be huge. Like, if you're looking in the 70s, after the 50s and the 60s, and people were like disillusioned with big budget movies like Cleopatra, and then you had the Watergate scandal, and you had Vietnam, and everybody was just so disillusioned with everything. And so when they're shooting this, and the new Hollywood, so you had Spielberg and Coppola and Scorsese and the Brian De Palma, and they came out of nowhere. And what they did is their movie fed lives, they took everything that they loved and they made it feel new, right? But so Godfather is obviously taken from the Jimmy Cagney movies, the gangster movies, right? Spielberg, like Jaws is The Birds. Jaws is Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's like Scorsese took, again, every other gangster picture. Brian De Palma like just copied Hitchcock like nonstop. So, but they made it their own thing. But what's funny is these guys, when they started, Coppola when he was shooting The Godfather, and Spielberg when he was shooting Jaws, and Lucas when he was shooting Star Wars, nobody had confidence that these movies were going to go anywhere. They were like, these directors don't know what they're doing. I know that Jaws was scheduled for a $3 million budget with a 55-day shooting schedule, and it went to $9 and 159 days because they shot on the ocean, right? And so nobody had faith in these things. But because people were so disillusioned, they took these classical things and made it feel fresh and new. And also the movies kind of feel disillusioned. And so it fit with what everybody was. And so that's when they became a big hit. So Dreyfuss saying that, and I've seen interviews with him. Yeah, I was like, you're just being humble. Like, you didn't know. Nobody knows that Jaws is going to become the biggest movie of all time. Nobody knew that. Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that it just exploded and became this thing was just typical of the 70s. Like, people just were ready for something new, and that's where it hit. But I want to talk about the characters, obviously, because Ruth, obviously, you talking about those, and so you have that opinion. That's great, and I wanted to talk about mine. But Rae, did we find out what you think of the movie? What's your connection with the movie?
So like I said, I had only seen like the TV version of this forever and ever. And I have always had kind of this is silly. I grew up in the Ozarks, and I grew up with like the tales of like, the sharks that will swim up the St. Louis, whatever, like the Mississippi River, they'll swim up to St. Louis, they'll attack the people. Like, this is like a thing that I heard. And St. Louis was like the big town clear up north, like, right? And so I would be scared. Like, my dad would be like, oh yeah, that, like, one of the rivers that feeds this pond also, like, I don't know, comes from the Mississippi or feeds the Mississippi or whatever it was. And I would be like, there's sharks in there, like, you know. And so the concept of going to a beach, like, I'm like, you guys are ridiculous, like, you know. And I remember we went to Florida, and I was like maybe 7 or 8. We went to Florida, and in the hotel the night before, because we're idiots, we watched Jaws, the TV Jaws. And then we were like out on the beach, and like they're like, hey, come play. And I would not go in past my knees. Like,
you're like, I can get out.
At 8 years old, and I'm a little person, like I'm right now I'm 4'11".
And they killed a kid in the movie.
Right. Like,
And
I was like, you know, so it always scared me, but I had never, until for this podcast, I had never actually seen like the full movie, the real movie. And so, like, as I was watching it, it wasn't drastically different, but like Ruth was saying, like, I was just like, oh my gosh, whoa, they showed, you know, whether it was like showing more of Chrissy or whatever, or just showing more of like visceral, like carnage that they didn't show on the cut for TV, you know.
The shot of that guy's leg is something else.
Yeah, like things like that I'm just like, see, I was scared with the safe for 8-year-olds version, like,
yeah.
But yeah, I have an endearing, terrifying passion for sharks. I love them, and I am so scared of them that I legitimately still have trouble, like I've never been on a boat in open water. It's just a thing, like, you know. but yeah, that, even though I didn't think that it really had a huge effect on me, I guess it did, because I cannot think of a second shark exposure that I had except for Jaws for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're all attacking it from different. And again, I've seen the movie so many times that when I first saw the Blu-ray, I was like, I can see the waves in the water. Like, I can. This is amazing. Like, because I'd never seen. That's how many times I'd watched the movie that I could pick up that I could see waves now. But you know, that's what you guys talk about all the time about watching the movie first versus the book first, right? And I like that the book is its own separate thing. Even though I say it's pretty terrible as a book, I still like that it's out there and you can have this alternate thing. Again, we're talking about Spielberg funneling it down and just focusing on the shark parts. So, like, the character wise, like, if I was to compare them, like, Brody in the book is more like kind of a hard-boiled detective kind of guy. He even uses the word dame at one point. I'm like, is he from the 50s? Like, so, and he doesn't, I don't know if he changes. Like, he and Ellen have such a cantankerous relationship that I'm like, do these two even love each other? Because they're always yelling at each other and sniping at each other. And then even at the end, I thought it was interesting that, yeah, she realizes, oh, I could be leading this rich life, but I love my life. I love my husband. And she reconciles with that. And then their argument at the end is not because they've got a class thing. It's that she doesn't understand why he wants to go back out and risk his life when all of a sudden he means something to her. And she doesn't want, I thought that was very interesting character-wise. But again, what they're doing is they're funneling it down to that camaraderie between the three guys in the boat. So the whole movie for me comes down to Brody, Hooper, and Quint on that boat and how they bond and their differences, how they bounce off each other. In the book, Hooper is like the epitome of everything Brody hates, right? So they're always at each other, and it's so one note all the way through. Like, they never have a moment, unless it's on a walkie-talkie where they're not looking at each other, right? And then Quint he gets like 2 pages. They devote more time to the reveal of Mayor Vaughn's mob ties
Mhm.
than they have to all of Quint up to then.
Yeah.
And then when Quint shows up, he's just a one-note character. He's the, in my head, because of the way that Benchley was written, I just imagine him talking like Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob Square. There was no characterization and I would just laugh every time it was a Quint dialogue. I was like, you sound like the Gorton's fisherman, you know, like you're nothing. And the thing with Meadows is, when I was reading the book, like, it's funny, first of all, that yeah, he's there and Gottlieb plays him in the movie, right? But I like how Meadows talks to Hooper once and all of a sudden he's a shark expert. Like, he goes on for pages about how he knows the ins and outs of how sharks work. And I'm like, it doesn't feel natural that he would just have it. And all of a sudden, shouldn't Hooper be the guy? Because Hooper doesn't really talk about ichthyology at all. Like, he just shows up and he's there to antagonize Brody. I think Richard Dreyfuss humanizes that character. Yeah, it's just a regular dude, right? But the way that he acts, and he has that boat and he keeps talking about how rich he is, and he's got the Dreyfuss, mannerisms, and he's funny. I like that he and Brody become friends, because Brody feels like an outsider, and this guy that's also an outsider comes in, and they kind of had that bond. And the reason that I like Brody better in the movie, like I mentioned before, I didn't understand why I attached myself so much to Brody in the movie, because I had that fear of the water. And I just identified with Brody and the Scheider character so much, because I was like, I can see myself on the screen here. And I didn't understand that either. I'm like, that's me. This character is me, right? And so I have such a strong connection to that in the book it kind of mentions it, that he's not comfortable in the water, but that's like natural. I just think that it's stronger in the book, and I identify stronger in the movie, and I identify with it more in the movie because I feel like Brody feels. And then when Quint comes in, and yeah, he has that scene with the chalkboard, he makes such an impression that you remember him and when the shark attacks and stuff like that, you're like, well, get Quint, right? Like, you know that he's going to be a character that's going to show up. I just like how it humanizes everything. And Brody's kids are like a non-existent in the book. They show up for like one scene and that's it. But I felt like they're actual human beings in the movie. They have the part where Michael's in the estuary and the shark attacks there, and that makes it personal. And that's what leads us into that third act. But again, it's that third act that's the whole movie for me. It's when all these characters, everything has been laid bare for them, and they're just bouncing off each other. And Quint has that masterful monologue about the Indianapolis that gives you, he had none of that characterization in the book. Like I said, he's the Gorton's fisherman. That's it. But in the movie, it becomes this thing about who's the bigger man. Is it this guy that feels like he wants to have a fist fight with a shark because he hates sharks so much? Is it this rich dude, like, that comes from another town and he just wants to prove himself? Or is it this guy that's trying to keep his town under control? You know what I mean? And even the mayor in the book is humanized, in the movie is humanized, because I don't know, the mafia stuff was interesting, but I didn't think it needed that. Him wanting to keep the beaches open because of the commerce, I thought that was enough for him to be a villain. And when they're in the hospital in the movie and Vaughn goes, my kids were on that beach too. It's like, he's so human right now. I get that he was flawed and he wanted to keep the beaches open because the commerce is going to affect the town. Again, it's hinted at in the movie and it's really delved into more in the book. And so that was nice. But I just like how he becomes human. Yeah. And again, when Hooper dies, Ray, like you said, die. Like, oh, he gets crunched. Big deal. Like, I hated this guy. Like, good. But then when Quint dies, you don't feel anything, right? So by the end, when Quint gets killed, I just feel like you feel something because you've got to know all these people. And I think, who was it in one of your, I think maybe it was the Princess Bride episode, where one of you said that the less characterization that's there's so much characterization in the book that when you peel it back, they feel more three-dimensional because you're peeling away dimensions. It's weird. Like, you just let the visuals and the actors kind of do I don't know. I just identified with the characters more in the movie than the book, where they're just more like avatars or just stand-ins for somebody else, as opposed to actual physical human beings. But
so for the making of the movie, because they were having so much trouble with the shark, like, they kept saying that part of the reason they are filming on open ocean, which apparently was not a thing that had been done up to that point, but also they had mechanical shark because you can't train a shark. Like you can't make the shark do what you want it to do.
Right.
And they had 3 or 4 mechanical sharks or pieces of sharks, and they constantly were not working. They would take hours to set up, and then the salt water would get in there and mess it up, and the shot was ruined and the light was gone, and it's like a whole thing. And so Spielberg said there came a point that he's like, you know what? The fact that there is a shark, there's something that you can't see out there killing might be enough for now. Like he started focusing, they did all the land shots, and he really wanted to focus on the characters and develop them and make you feel for them. Like the part you were saying with the was the Indiana or Illinois?
In Indianapolis, yeah.
Indianapolis, yeah. That real actual story, and they just dropped Quint into it. But that like makes you like, you're like, okay, I get it. I love you.
Yeah. Go
punch that shark in the face. Like, you know what I mean? Like
right.
You are on his side now, you know? And he's like, I wanted everyone to feel Brody's angst. And I wanted everyone to see that Hooper was like, this is like my life's goal. Also, it could kill me, you know, like, you know, like getting into the to the cage and whatever, like, that's crazy. You know that this is a man killer, but also this is what I exist for, you know, like he wanted you to feel every one of those. And what's his name? The guy that plays Quint.
Robert Shaw.
Yes. So they talk about he was one of those like the classic drunk English actors or whatever, and he's amazing. Like if you don't know his body of work, he's A-list, right? And he would get very soused. And there was the when he went to do that monologue, to shoot that scene, the first time he came in, he's like, I need to have a few drinks. This is a lot to handle, even to represent these men. This is a lot for me, so I'm gonna do what I need to do. And so they all said, you do it, man, like you know. And he got in there, and he was like, they had to like half carry him in, and he was slurring and crazy, like they couldn't hardly understand. And he apologized afterwards. He's like, did I just make a complete fool of myself? And Spielberg's like, I guess we'll see. And so he goes in the next day and he shot it like completely sober. And in the movie, you see parts of both. The like they edit it, because there are moments that he, as the drunk slurring started, he gets the glassy eyed look, and he just starts to kind of almost like he's back there, you know, and then he'll pop back out of that and he'll be delivering this monologue to these men. And so they used for the really emotional parts, they used a lot of these bits from when he was just super drunk, because it emoted in a way that a sober actor just didn't do, even though he did a brilliant job all the way through. And so like things like that like everything was so unconventional, but everything, it was all about the shark until the shark was just being a jerk. And then it became all about the act. He's like, I'm going to make you love every single character. You're going to be sad for every death, even Chrissy. The whole thing about like when she's like being pulled in the water, they actually had cords wrapped around her, and they would have people on this side that would all pull her this way, and then people on this side that would all pull, like things that you can't do today, like you can't get away with that today. But just so that you're like, oh my gosh, what is happening to this poor girl? Her screams, her prayer, like when she's like hanging onto the buoy and she's like, oh God, save me, please help me. And then it's actually Spielberg himself. He's like, I knew exactly how I wanted this to look when the shark pulls her under. So he was the one that actually pulled her under so that it was exactly right. And when she would be screaming or whatever, and he's like, it's too it's too Hollywood. He actually would be he had her tilt her head back and scream, and he would be pouring water on her face.
Waterboarded her, yes.
Yeah, like just to like get so that you cared about this slut that just ran into the ocean naked. Like she smiled at a guy and he was
That's
like,
what you get.
That's what we've learned from all horror films.
but we love her. Like, but you
this
still
and you run around naked, you're gonna get eaten or killed right off the bat.
So now you know.
So yeah.
If you've got scary music, don't run into the beach, into the water naked. But yeah, like you care about all of them. And how much of the shark do you see? None of it, but you know he's there. He's the star, even when he doesn't actually exist.
Well, Rae, wow, yeah, thank you for saying all of that, because I think that's so important, right? The plan was to use the shark. Like, you were supposed to see the shark eater, like, come up and flash around, and they couldn't make it work. And they, like you said, it was being such a jerk that they had to pare back. And because of that happy accident, I know that the first thing people will say when you bring up Jaws is that shark looks fake, right? Even Marty McFly said it in a Back to the Future movie, right? That's going to be everybody's first thing that they say. But the masterful thing about this movie, again, by accident, Spielberg had to pair. It's just like you said, Rae. She's being yanked around by something we can't see. That's more terrifying than actually seeing the shark, right? Because Spielberg pared back and we only get glimpses of the shark, and we have John Williams's iconic is too light of a word to describe the theme, the Jaws theme and the music for this. But you have that just to suggest everything. By the time that the shark shows up with, come chum some of this shit, that kind of thing, when it pops up, it feels like a shark. It looks fake, but they built it up to the point that it feels like an actual shark, right? That's what I've always loved about it. And then they keep, with the barrels and everything, they keep hinting, where it's always a presence because you know where it is visually. But the thing that's great, just like you said, Spielberg saying, I've got to amp up the humans in this to make, it's about a shark, but the most enthralling part of the movie is Quint's monologue. And it's not just Quint, it's not just the actor, even though it's masterful. Watch Dreyfuss's face in the background. His mouth is just hanging open. And there's more power in that scene than there is in most, I would say, any blockbuster today. It's not about the shark. It's about those three guys and what they're facing, their inner conflict, and there is becoming their outer conflict. I just think that whole thing is just, it took everything, like the guts of the book, and it made that the point of the movie. But again, I'm glad that both exist. I just think that when you make Quint, when he's giving that speech, it's still about the shark, right? It's not about Ellen feeling like she's not in with the rich people anymore. It's not about the mafia controlling the town. It's still about the shark. I think that's the difference, is even though you have these asides, it's still able to get that point across, that it feels very, I don't know, the shark is always a threat in the movie where it's not in the book.
Yeah, the hyper focuses it on that threat. I do love some of the iconic things he does in the movie. So yes, accidentally, he made it more interesting by slowly getting more and more and more of the shark. And now that's kind of thing that people do on purpose, where you purposely only show so much first. You give them a little bit more and a little bit more, and it gets more and more high risk as you go. And so that does work for the movie, that it adds the mystery and it makes it just more enthralling.
And you know what that's called? That's called Spielbergian.
Oh yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Bringing it back from that Jurassic Park episode. Good job.
Yep.
That's a good word.
Also love the compression shot in that moment where Brody's sitting on the beach and they all told him it can possibly happen again. And like his kids are out there, and when he realizes that, yeah, in the book he's not on the beach when that happens, but I think that works out okay to condense the two different situations into one moment. Like sometimes when they have to condense things from a book into a movie, it's awkward and it's weird, and sometimes it works. And I think that one worked okay to have what happened in a different part of the book happen together here, because Brody's reaction to that and that compression shot is so perfect to the whole, like, you're coming in and going out at the same time, and that, like, you get that emotion from that shot, not just from how he's expressing, because you can see it on his face, but you feel it in that moment. You have chills too, because you're like, oh crap, my kids are right there, my kids are out there too. and a kid just got eaten. The shark's here. And that realization that he was right. They should have shut down the beach.
Mhm.
And now somebody's dead. And that was the thing that I really liked about the book, is you really got to sympathize with Brody, where he's in a terrible position because his job is to protect the people, but he's also has a loyalty to the town. And he has people being like, why didn't she shut it down? Or like, don't you dare shut it down. There's one thing that they say in the town meeting that Johnny wanted to make sure that I said something about. There was one lady, they said they're going to shut down the beach for 24 hours. She's like, 24 hours is like 3 weeks.
2 weeks.
I was like, whoa, these guys don't understand the concept of time here. But I will agree with you that the whole third act of the movie is probably the best part, and where the movie does improve upon the book, because a lot of that stuff, like with Quint, wasn't there. And that whole camaraderie, there are parts of it where it feels really like cheesy and fake, and other parts where it's like very emotional and like you really feel it. So I agree definitely with Indianapolis. I can't say words. Story is very heart-wrenching, and like the response of Hooper and Brody as they're listening to it is very powerful to the moment too. And it becomes very interesting that they go from being very different types of people to all of a sudden they can
bond,
all agree on something.
Mhm.
You know, they're really not the likeliest people to bond. I do love that they had to have the classic dude look at my scars moment. Look how cool I am.
Did
I was
you
this is
notice
such a dude moment.
when they're comparing scars, all Brody has, he looks down at his appendix scar. Did you notice that? Like he just that's all that it's all that he has.
I'm a cop, but I'm the least gnarled up person here.
Yeah, such a funny thing. I think, yeah, that's the like I said, it's the meat, right? I think it's because Ruth, you talked about the town thing, and yeah, Spielberg does that. Like in Close Encounters, like when you have the Richard Dreyfuss, the Neary character, his family, whenever there's a scene with them, it's just them yelling at each other, and it feels like a family feels, right? I think there's an interesting dichotomy here, because in the town meeting, yeah, it's not quite realistic, because a town thing would never be that rambunctious, right? But again, he's trying to get across, I think, in that moment, that nobody's listening to anybody. Like it's all about keeping the beach out. So that's the hecticness. But it harkens back to an earlier shot where it's Brody when he wakes up and he gets the first phone call. And it's an interesting, I think it's a split diopter shot where you see Brody in the foreground on the phone and you see Ellen in the back with the two kids, but you don't hear either conversation. You know how normally in a movie, if there's dialogue, it'll fade the other people out and you'll only hear the main part that they want you to hear. Instead, you don't hear either. Both conversations are pitched at the same level. And I think what that scene is doing, that shot, it's telling you that Brody is torn between his job and torn between his family, right? So even though Jaws isn't thought of as a deep movie, like there's a part of the end after Michael is attacked where Brody says to Ellen, take our kids home. And she says, back to New York. And he says, no, home here, because he's making a stand, right? Yeah. My family and my job have now become one, and I'm protecting my family by doing my job. That's visually, it's great.
Not gonna run away.
Yeah. Ruth, you talked about the scene where it's Brody on the beach. Spielberg has such an innate sense of how to shoot scenes and how to make things visceral and how to make them move. That whole scene seems like it's from Brody's perspective. Like you see that, you know, in the 70s, I think the thing that keeps Jaws from being dated is, number one, the music score. John Williams did not want to do like the woodwinds and percussion like you heard in all the 70s stuff. And then also 70s movies, you can tell it's a 70s movie because they always do these quick zoom ins on characters that don't look natural. Spielberg does this.
Or a Steven Soderbergh movie.
Yeah, who's trying to ape that, right? But in here, Spielberg does that when he's zooming in on Brody, except he does it with wipes across the screen where it keeps getting closer on him. Right. And so it's all taken from his perspective, and it's just masterfully done. If you look at the scene where Brody is going out on the ferry and he's being confronted by Vaughn and all of the statesmen or whatever.
Yeah, they'll corner him on the ferry.
They corner him like, yeah, Brody is on the left and everybody's crowding him on the right. Right. Yeah. But then the shot, Brody and Vaughn and Meadows move in closer, and then the other statesmen, they turn their backs on us, right? So they're turning their backs on what's being discussed. Like, I don't care if there's people being killed. We need to keep the beaches open, right? Yeah. And then it zooms in even more, and then Meadows walks away with his back to the camera, and now it's just Brody and Vaughn. So again, he's zooming in on what's visually and what's important, right?
Yeah.
But then too, like working with the music, like every time you see the shark's perspective, it has the Jaws theme, right? It has the, and by the way, how iconic is it that Williams just didn't score an iconic movie? He scored a theme for an animal. You know what I mean? Whenever you hear dun dun dun, it means shark. It doesn't mean Jaws. Like if you hear da 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 da, you think Star Wars. You don't think space travel. You don't think shuttles.
Yeah.
When you hear that 2-note theme, it's like, oh, that means shark, right? But every time you see the shark's perspective, it has that theme. But Spielberg does something so smart when it turns out that it's those 2 kids that are just faking the shark attack. It shows you the perspective, but you're tricked into thinking it's the shark, but he's telling you it's not because they're not playing the music. It's so it's so crazy. Like I don't know. Like Spielberg is just he's unnatural the way that he can just be able to do these things visually that you don't even notice. And you guys talking about movies, what episode was it where I think Ruth, you said like movies don't concentrate on classical storytelling anymore. Like it's all about being natural or all about flash and trying to organic stuff, but they don't. Spielberg is still making movies and he's still just as masterful now as he is, but he's not flashy about it. He's not quick cutting. He's still doing his same wonders and quick cuts and close-ups, and it's just I just think we've lost the ability to enjoy something like that, where you can just sit down and be told a great story. And that's again what made Top Gun Maverick such a refresher, is its classical storytelling. It's not flashy, and I think that was the difference. And I don't think people noticed what the difference was. They just were like, oh, this is great, but they don't understand that it's just classical, right? That's we're missing so much of that in today's movies. It's crazy. I don't know, it's so sad to watch.
Well, and that's so the guy that wrote the theme, he was saying that he wanted, well, when he was showing Spielberg the theme, he's like, it's primal. Having only 2 or 3 notes that repeats, like it triggers a primal, like that's because, like you said, like with the dun, 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 and this is high adventure. This is boys with swords, or you know what I mean. Like it puts you there. Whereas just the primal, like heartbeat almost, and it gets louder and faster as the shark approaches. And then at the bite, at the giant spray of blood and guts or whatever, that's when it goes, and it like, and that's when you have the heart attack, which, so I was talking about the guy in the cage. So, the scene with the shark cage, I'm kind of changing a little bit, but that the shark cage was too small and they didn't want to put Dreyfus in there anyway, and they there was a little person that they had doing the cage scene, and he had a heart attack when an actual shark swam at him. He had a heart attack. He survived, but and so when you see the shark, so that's why that great white shark off the coast of Australia is why Hooper gets to live, because he was going to that scene was going to happen, and then they were going to show it from the topside perspective of Hooper getting it, but they had to pull him out. They had to pull him out of the cage, and then they have all of this footage of a shark attacking an empty cage, and they were like,
"Oh,
that's not the story." And so they had like legitimately like last minute, like, how do we save this? They had him swim out and hide, and then be like, "Pop, also I'm still alive." But they're like, "Yep, Hooper was saved by the shark, by a real shark." I think if I was in that cage, I might have a heart attack too. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this guy is like just trying to make a buck and do the job, and
Yeah.
But
Well, that's classical stuff too. I know in Casablanca they did that. They used short people, like when they were shooting like an airplane in the back. It was just a fake airplane or a matte painting, but they used for forced perspective. They put shorter people out there so it looked like they were actual. The plane was to scale. So again, it's Spielberg just taking the shot that I told you about on the ferry. There's a similar shot, I believe, in Bridge on the River Kwai, the David Lean movie, and Spielberg is just taking these things and he's improving on it because there's more dynamic character movement in that shot. But it's all just Spielberg just taking things that he's learned and giving it, as opposed like today, like with nostalgia, like being the whole story.
Yeah,
Spielberg
they're
is using
leaning
that
onto that.
nostalgia.
They're hoping that'll sell it.
Right, but Spielberg used nostalgia to tell new stories in new ways. Here's the thing that you know, but I'm going to twist it. I'm going to turn it on its ear to give you a different perspective. And so that's the difference between, again, then and now. And it's just sad that somebody can watch Jaws and not think and think like a superhero movie today is more impressive than that, with all the CG and just busyness, as opposed to just real classy filmmaking. I don't know. But let me ask you both, what did you both think of the ending of the book? It took me forever to realize what had happened, because it's so, to me, it feels so anticlimactic in the book.
Yeah.
So what did the two of you, first of all, what did you think happened? And then how did you feel about it actually happening?
Well, I got the understanding that the shark, in his attacking the boat and trying to sink them, end up getting caught up in all the rigging as the boat is sinking and got dragged down to the ocean floor with the ship. And one of the things he talks about in the book is how sharks have to keep moving. They can't stop or they'll die. So him being stuck with all the rigging of the ship all around him, weighing him down, he's going to die. And that's part of why they end up being able to usually catch a shark with the barrels, is that it's forcing him to come up. It's forcing him he has less movement, and then slowly they wear him down and they can catch him. But because this is like a mega crazy super shark, it takes like 1 billion barrels, and then he's able to sink them down anyway. So it's like, dude, this shark has muscles like crazy. But yeah, I like to find in the book, but I have to agree that the way they did it in the movie is just so much more satisfying. Yeah, I wish Hooper died personally, because I like that better, having it just be Brody, because I still didn't really like Hooper in the movie. And I'm surprised to hear that they were gonna kill him, because I thought they didn't kill Hooper because of Richard Dreyfuss. And I'm like, we can't kill Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah.
No.
Well, Ray,
No,
Ray, what did you think of the ending then? Of the book?
I agree that I did find it rather anticlimactic, and I kind of wondered if it was in order to give you that sense of like, but is it really over?
Is it? Oh.
Do you know what I
And
mean?
he gets eaten on the way back. Well, he's swimming back to shore suddenly.
Yeah, well, and also I don't know. Just when you're seeing it from Brody's perspective, and he's like swimming back to shore or floating back to shore, whatever it was. If that shark was that big and existed there, even if that one truly can't come back, is this a thing now? Like, you know,
more sharks.
And that's, I felt like that was the sense you were being left with. Like, okay, that battle is over, but is this over, or is this my new normal? Like, is kind of what I felt like maybe we were supposed to be left with.
Right. I just think it's when you I have a problem with like John Grisham books, because in the 3 or 4 books that I read, the main character that you stick with doesn't solve the problem at the end. Like, I have a problem if I'm going to sit and read a book and it's going to take me a week or whatever to read. Like in A Time to Kill, in the movie, like the McConaughey character gives the speech that wins the case, right? In the book, you're worried about how is he going to do it? I can't do it. And then all of a sudden, he's free, because a jury member that we've never met before comes in. It turns out that she gave the speech and she wins the case for him. And so I'm like, why did we not follow the jury member? Why did we follow this other guy who's so bad at his job that he can't accomplish his goals, right? And in The Firm, they get caught up in the mafia, and then the main character can't do anything, he runs away. Pelican Brief, they get caught up in the mafia, she can't do anything, she runs away. The Client, they can't do anything, they run. I'm like, this is so unsatisfying.
These
and
are
so I'm like,
passive characters.
yeah, I am never reading a John Grisham book again because he is wasting my time. I'm not going to spend time empathizing and sympathizing with a character just to have somebody else come and solve the problem.
Yeah.
I just think that it's
themselves.
Brody doesn't do anything. He's just there, and then the shark dies or goes away, and it's like, oh well, that's over. It's not satisfying.
Yeah.
And famously, when Spielberg came up with the gas tank, Benchley said, "That's gas tanks don't do that. Like, it's not going to blow up. It'll just puncture and maybe fly off. Like nothing will happen." And Spielberg flat out looked him in the face and said, "It'll work because I say it'll work. Like I'll have the audience in the grip of my hand." And Spielberg does that a lot. In Jurassic Park, the scene where you first are introduced, I love bringing this up. When you're introduced to the T-Rex, you see that the ground is all flat, and the T-Rex comes through on flat ground. He just breaks through one part of the gate, right? He comes through. But then when they shoved the Jeeps off the side, there's a 60-foot drop.
Never.
Like, was he on stilts?
Yeah.
But the thing is, Spielberg is so good at getting you in his grip that you don't care. Right? It doesn't matter. It's so good that it's and Jurassic Park, it was like 10 years later, I was like, wait. Because I didn't think about it.
Just didn't notice at the time, but you're wait.
Yeah. It's the same thing with the shark. I just think, talking about the 70s disillusionment, people saw the shark, say, as the thing that was bringing them down. They saw it as the Vietnam War. They saw it as the Watergate scandal. So Brody destroying the shark and destroying everything that they had was bringing them down, it just elated audiences seeing that. It's such a great audience movie. And again, you can have all the stuff with the town and stuff. I just wonder if you'd had all that and you made it a 3-hour movie, would it have been the biggest blockbuster of all time?
Right.
You know what I mean? So you have to make these decisions. And to me personally, and both of you talked about this before, I think a book is different from a movie. It has to be. I don't want to. The first 2 Harry Potters were so boring to me because Chris Columbus is such a boring director that he just shot the book. And so I was like, the movie that I saw in my head when I was reading those first 2 Harry is much better than this. You know what I mean? Where's and so I get bored with that. So when Cuarón comes in for the 3rd one, I'm like, oh, this is much better because it feels like a movie and it's something that I haven't seen before.
They're putting their own touch on it instead of just being like, well, this is the book.
Yeah, it has to be different. I'm as much as I dislike a lot of the book, I'm glad that it's out there and you can see the differences and the changes that were.
Yeah. I would personally say the only movie I can think of off the top of my head where it's almost exactly like the book and it works is Pride and Prejudice, the A&E BBC version, and I would watch that over and over again.
The Colin Firth,
of course, the only Mr. Darcy. And that's one of the things that was when I watched the remake in theaters, as soon as it was over, I turned my mom and I go, well, that wasn't very good. And like there were 3 girls in front of us that apparently loved it, and I started explaining, well, they totally didn't use Wickham very well, and like you barely meet him, and that was a huge part of the story, and it had a huge impact. But like you see him for 1 second, it's like, oh, he didn't like me because his father liked me better, and that was it. And it was like, that wasn't interesting at all. And everybody makes a big fuss about that movie, and there's things that he does, like the director does in the movie, that are interesting, but I feel like they sort of numbed everybody down, so they're far less interesting. And I guess they're also trying to like, well, we can't do a 6-hour movie, we can't do a miniseries. So that's sort of the thing you always run into. If you're going to do a book into a movie, either you're going to make it a movie or a miniseries. If you want to get everything in there, you love every part of the book, it's got to be a miniseries or a TV show. You can't do it in a movie unless you're going to do Lord of the Rings with like 3 hours. And even then,
they cut out a ton of that.
They cut out the Battle of Hobbiton in the 3rd book, which is to me the whole point of the entire series, because Peter Jackson didn't like it. But I guess he doesn't get it because he's not a short person. He doesn't get the whole big deal that these little people who didn't think they could do anything in the very end, they're the ones that save town. They save their town, not somebody else. They become the one that solves the problem. And I think that was very empowering. As a little person, I'm not a little person, but I'm a normal little person. That's empowering.
You're small.
Yeah. Rae and I are tiny. We're the tiny friends.
So we talked about it with Spielberg. You were talking about it a little with Pride and Prejudice. For me, I tend to not be super critical if you got me into your story. Like you said, the T-Rex stepping onto like straight across, like
Floating
it
on air.
should matter.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't. I know it's there. Everyone else talks about it's there. It does not bother me because you got me in there. I am being hunted by a T-Rex.
Yeah.
Same thing with the shark. I never see the shark for most of the movie. There's parts that people will now like criticize or whatever. I don't care. I'm being attacked by a shark. I'm in open water with a shark. You know what I mean? And for me, it's the same in the Pride and Prejudice. I'm okay with that. Well, we've talked about, I watched about
every Pride and Prejudice known to man.
I watched
Yeah.
about 17 to 20, but I found like 30 some odd Pride and Prejudice things. It
Good
was
for
crazy.
you.
But I liked a fair few of them if you were telling me the Elizabeth Darcy story. If you could convince me that I was watching this happen to my friend or whatever, then I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
And if you couldn't, then you suck. So I watched because of course I did. I watched Jaws 2. And I was going to watch Jaws 3, but then I watched Jaws 2.
Okay.
And it's a different director, and I swear they were like, they kind of did the Disney thing. They were like, well, that was a huge hit. Let's do it again. And I felt like it was almost scene for scene, like, oh, and here is where we're going to see it, but it's not going to attack. Oh, and here is where it's going to get the person on the ski instead of on the raft or whatever it was, but it was just the same thing over and over again. And I don't care. You're not telling me a story anymore. Not gonna lie, I didn't watch the last like 30-40 minutes of it because I'm like, I don't care. Eat them all.
Yeah.
So, but in the first one, even though I had seen it before to an extent on the TV version, but I was still there. And every time I hear that music, I'm like, oh, here it comes. Like, like I was in it. I was in that water with you. And so if you can do that, have as many little technical things off as you want, tell me your story.
Yeah.
And to me, that makes it like, because when I'm reading a book, I can stop. And I usually have to, and when I'm watching the movie, even if I have to stop it, like there are some that I stop the movie, I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. I'll have to take it back or whatever. This was not one of those. This is one of those that I can always pick up. I'm always immediately right back in feeling whatever I'm supposed to be feeling. Job well done. When I'm reading the book and I stop reading the book and then I pick it back up, I have to go, okay, right, what's going on? Oh, dinner party. Okay. And I have to like get back into it. So for that, like you said, I am happy that they both exist because they are different and they pull me different ways, but I'm so happy that it was Spielberg that got this movie, because he was not a big deal. I think wasn't the only thing he had really done, the only big thing. It was Duel, wasn't it?
And then Sugarland Express came out, right? And that was not a huge hit, but it was at least, who's this guy? So that's what got him the job on Jaws.
Yeah. He wasn't like the Spielberg, like, you know what I mean? Like now he could just pump out crap and people will be like, it's Spielberg. Like,
oh, well, Spielberg did it.
And so I am very, very happy that the movie actually wasn't working the way they wanted it to. It's unfortunate that it, cost them 4 times what it was supposed to and all of that. Also, well worth every frustrating day.
Yeah.
Every dollar that was gone, worth it.
Yeah.
For me. Because it's all about me, right?
Well, then that's the truth, though. It's about the audience. It's about each person being able to have that experience and feel like the director, the actors, the writers are telling the story to you, not just to anybody, not to everybody, but you. And if you get that across in a movie, then that's how you draw people, and that's how people end up really loving your film, because they don't feel like it was just made for everybody. It's made for you.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to say, I have to say, as far as any director I know, I feel like Spielberg is probably the most iconic as far as having quotable or like memeable things. Like, you always hear people like, and they're in the pool, they do the Jaws music, and like if you're playing shark, like, you know, shark in the water, whatever, that's done. People are always talking or making fun of or quoting Jurassic Park. And you see it in other movies where they make fun of the rear view mirror and objects are closer than they appear. And I love that kind of stuff. And I think you see that more with Spielberg movies than any other director that I know of. You'll see his things or things that are iconic from his movies reused somewhere else, where somebody's referencing his movies a lot. And I can't think of anybody else that has that kind of memorability that
outside of the filmies, like, because there are people that will be, well, kind of like NostalgiaCast and maybe some other thing where like you're in, whether you're actually in the industry or you're like, your job is to know this industry, and so you might sit there and go, a Coppola film or whatever. But a lot of times, like, I don't care. I know the name Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah.
Maybe Godfather, is that?
Yep.
Yes. Oh, cool.
Absolutely.
Good job.
That's it. That's
Very
all I
proud of
got.
you,
Check him out. Like, and I know that that's not fair to him or his body of work or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, I'm sure there's, and there's other ones. There's another one that I know people are really, I can't remember his name now, but like people talk about how he was like a maniac, where he would make you redo the same scene 36 times.
Kubrick?
Kubrick.
Yep. Yes.
I'd be Kubrick. Yeah.
Yes. And like people will be like, oh yes, a Kubrick film. And I'm like, like,
it's slightly weird, kind of bad, and also kind of good. Yeah, it's a Kubrick film. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. I've probably seen his stuff, but when I see like I said, there are things that will just be so Spielbergian to me that I'm like, I bet he did. Let's just check that out. Oh, yep, that's one of his. You know, he's one that I can recognize by what
his signature on it. And I think that's what's important. Like, the directors that really stand out are the ones that can make it their own and sort of put their own flair on it, their own spin. And that's what makes great directors versus just, you know, just a point and shoot director. I'm just, okay, I'm just telling the story, and, you know, but we don't get at all what it means to them. And obviously for Spielberg, for him, it was about those characters. And like, he made it a priority to make those characters more three-dimensional or more interesting, because that's what he wanted to see. And so you get the movie he wanted to see, what he wanted to happen. I personally feel like you could have taken half of that whole end part where like they're all conversating and bonding out, and it would work better. So I got kind of bored of it after a while. There are good parts, but there's parts where I'm like, I don't need to see all this.
It's a bunch of men just
a man
manning each other. Yeah, I get it.
Like, first they're all like, you know, sort of having a peeing contest, and then they're like, oh, I'm a dude too. Look at my scars. And it's like Johnny's always telling me, well, if you want to make friends with a dude, all you gotta do is punch him, you know, get in a fight, and then you're friends. Because I guess that's worked for him a few times.
Well, for me, all you need to do is talk Spielberg, and I'll be your friend.
You're like, oh,
like we talked about, he's unnatural. Like, he came up with Coppola and Scorsese. You could argue that Scorsese is a better filmmaker. You could argue that Coppola is a better filmmaker, or that The Godfather is a better movie than Jaws, right? And you can make that argument, and I'll be fine with it. But Spielberg had a way, but they weren't, other than The Godfather, they weren't giant hits. Scorsese's never had $1 billion or multi-million-dollar movie, right? Even though he's a talented director, Spielberg was just able to bridge that gap between the filmies and the regular people, like no other director in his prime,
right? And so that's the difference. I just think that that's just crazy. He was 26 when he made Jaws, and he knew exactly where to point his camera at that age. I don't remember where I am most of the time, and I'm 46. You know what I mean? It's like, how did he do that? So yeah, Spielberg is just my favorite living director, just because of what he did and how he got me into loving movies.
He
And I owe
definitely
that
has
all
an
to him and to Jaws.
impressive body of work. He definitely has his own style. He definitely is his own thing. So you gotta give him that. I would disagree. I think Godfather is actually a really boring movie, and Godfather 2 is better. And I don't even really like the Godfathers, but the second one's definitely better. I have to agree with everybody on that. But Jaws is definitely a more interesting. It's a blockbuster film without being a blockbuster film. And I think that's what's interesting about it, is it is doing big things, but it's doing it in a subtle way. So it's not like all bam, bam, bam. So it's not flashy, but at the same time, it is like a epic story happening. But there's something about how he told it that it's not Hollywood, but Hollywood at the same time. Like, they're in the middle somewhere. So anything else you guys want to add or contribute to the conversation before we wrap this up?
I mean, I could talk.
I love your
forever.
podcast. I love your podcast. I could talk for like too about Jaws, but you two, it's so fun. Like when I do research for things, you think of it as homework. You know what I mean? And you're like, I have to listen to the podcast so I know what they're talking about. I guess I could do it now, but I listened to like 4 of your episodes in a row. I just think you two have a good rapport with each other. And you're like, I was telling Ruth before you popped on, Rae, is like your friendship really comes across in when you talk. And so I think it's great. I just think you guys need to advertise yourselves more so more people are aware of how much fun
we're too lazy.
Well, and so I really like we've mentioned a couple times, you do NostalgiaCast, and when I first, like, Ruth was first like, hey, my husband and his buddy do this thing, and I'm like, okay. And I like I said, like, podcasts were not really my speed. I had never actually listened to one at that point, and then you were doing like Goonies episode, and I had been trying to explain Goonies to my kids, and I was just like, I don't know what. And so I did that, and so then I was like, you know what? This is actually kind of fun, but I have to say, like, there are certain things that there are other, like, now I do either listen to or watch like a video component of podcasts. But some of them, even if the subject material might be interesting, it's just not interesting. And some of them, like, I thought we were long. Like, I'm like, all of our things are like over an hour. And then I listened to this one, it was like a 6.5 hour like thing, and I'm just like, oh man, I can't handle it. But I love, with the video component, it like changes the dynamics of everything. The big episode, watching Johnny in the beginning do his
goofy stuff,
Cocoa Pop, like that whole thing,
his impressions,
I was like, that's amazing. I'm in. But yeah, I think things like this, things like these are conversations that I would have if we were sitting in a room together. Like, this intrigues me, other people's opinions, whatever. And sometimes I'll have people that'll be like, oh yeah, I watched your Pride and Prejudice episode, I gotta say, I don't agree, or whatever. That's okay. Disagree with me. They'll be like,
converse.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, like, I'm here for that. So
yeah, and I think that's one of the sad things that's happening over time in our country and in the world, is that the ability to have differing opinions and have intelligent conversations about why you feel the way you do, and then be able to listen to the other person's opinion and actually gain something from it. It's going away, because people act like if you don't agree with them, then you hate them. And I don't know who got this idea that we all need to be that petty and childish, but that's not the case at all. I can not like something, but still respect it, or respect that somebody else likes it. It might not be for me, But it's fun to hear Darren, defend why he likes Jaws and go on about Spielberg and everything. And like, I might not have all the same feelings, but it's fun to see him get excited about it and like see it from his perspective. And it's like, okay, I can see, because you feel that strongly about it and you have all these feelings about it. It's like, it makes me appreciate it a little bit more. I might not agree with you, but I have a little more respect for that point of view now, because I see how much it matters to you.
Mhm.
And there's something about seeing people get passionate about something that matters to them that's interesting. When people are just like, well, this is what I think and you can't think anything else, it's like, well, that's really boring. Like, why we can't have a conversation? Why can't we discuss this? Because we might say things that the other person didn't think about, and then that gets you thinking and you're like, oh yeah, I didn't think of it that way. And then we're not necessarily going to convert each other, but we're definitely going to help like improve each other's thought process or broaden each other's horizons as far as like perspectives of the same thing. And I've always found it really interesting how people can see the same thing and get a million different interpretations of it and have different reactions of it.
Mhm.
And that always just amazes me, just how different we are. And it's interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, variety is the spice of life, right? You need
Yeah.
to have those it doesn't matter if we disagree or not, right? That's not what it's about. If we agree, great. But if we disagree, we have to at least be able to be civil with each other and see, well, yeah, I don't feel that same way about Jaws, but you being so passionate about it, yeah, that's great. Like we need to have these conversations. I could talk about this other thing that you don't like as much. It's just understanding where we're coming from so we can get along. We don't have to match. That's so boring.
Yeah, that is boring. And I feel like you have like a better connection with other people when you can have deep conversations with opposing views. It's just so much more interesting than we're like, oh, I like the color green. I like the color green too. Oh, that's great. Conversation ends.
Yeah.
There is also something to people loving the same thing. Like, I know this is a little off topic.
Yeah.
Well, like Ruth and I do like a lot of the same thing. And then I'll be like, I hated this book. And she's like, oh, I kind of liked it. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, why
Also,
did you hate it?
a
couple random things I want to mention about the movie that I found humorous and interesting. So what's with this town and having really old parents who found
Yeah.
children?
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the 70s, dudes. This is back when people still got married in their 20s and 30s, not in their 50s and 60s. Like there was, so like the mom of the boy that got killed,
Kittner,
she looks
yeah.
like a grandma.
Right.
She does not
Yeah.
look anywhere near the age of a woman who should have a 6-year-old son. Like,
well, and part of it, so Scott actually mentioned that he's like, everybody looks all like old and leathery, and I'm like, out in the sun on the beach all
Sun.
day long?
oh, it's all
Well,
that sun
the
exposure.
thing with Kittner though, it works because if she is that old, this is her one child. Like it took her so
I can see that.
long,
Yeah. Mhm.
and then she loses him just like
Yeah.
that, and
That's
so it
devastating.
hits you a little bit harder. Yeah.
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 I get that. But then they
Well-
also have the part where like the mayor's like, why aren't you getting on the beach, to this old couple? And then they have these 3 kids, and I'm like, are those their grandkids or those their children?
Yeah.
They're like,
Yeah.
it kept happening where these people just looked really old to be having
Mm.
young children. And I'm like, in the
So-
70s, that's not
Maybe
the way
it's
people
like a
are. People
Disney
that
movie
with
where all the
that.
parents are dead.
Quint and Hooper were supposed to have a very combative, like Hooper was not liked by either of these guys, right?
Mhm.
And Quint is kind of like oh, you think you're special? You're nothing. Like he kind of had, and so Dreyfus has he said that Shaw would be like this like wonderful, like maybe mentor, or like like this like very respectable, kind like person. And then when it was a shooting day, especially once they were out on the water, that like he would just come out and he would just be a jerk. And so like he said at one point there was you mentioned Dreyfus's mannerisms, and I thought that was a hilarious word that you used, because Shaw just walked past him one day and they'd been kind of like sniping at each other, and Shaw just walks past him and he's like, we're about to roll, mind your mannerisms, and then went and sat down. And he's like, Dreyfus was like, the whole day I was just like so thrown off by that. Like suddenly I'm like, was that a mannerism? Like
Like,
Yeah.
oh no, that might be.
was that a Dreyfus
over the
that I
top?
just did? What was the movie that Dreyfus had just done? It was
The
Apprentice.
Apprenticeship of Betty Kravitz, I think. Yeah.
Yes, and apparently it was awful. I've never seen it,
I never
but
even heard of it.
apparently he at least felt like he did an awful job, and the reviews kind of said so too.
Like,
And
oh,
so one day, when you see Quint like reading the newspaper, that newspaper has like
they'll have a review of that movie.
all the reviews about how awful Dreyfus and that movie
Oh
are.
my gosh, that's
And
funny.
he just like sat there and he kept like every time Dreyfus was supposed to say a line, he would just flick the paper a little bit, just like do the like, you know,
Oh,
just those little things that I'm like, see, and that made you like knowing that, and then seeing that scene, like you were talking about, he's talking about the Indianapolis, and Dreyfus is just like eating it up, you know, and it gives you that whole other layer of like, yeah, he was legitimately in awe, even though he knew the story at this point. Watching him perform it, and watching him perform it twice in two rather different ways, you know, just mesmerizing, you know, and being like, okay, you know what? Make fun of me all you want. You're right. I'm a boy playing at this. You are that man. You are Quint telling me about the Indianapolis, you know, like that kind of thing. I love that. To me, knowing that and then watching it again, like I'm like it was weird because I cried listening to him tell that story. I've heard it before. I've seen him do it before. I know the story. For some reason, this last time, like it like pulled out an emotion that it didn't pull out before, you know? And I'm like, that's it. That everybody there was just right. Those three men and Spielberg and, you know, and Gottlieb writing, and
Howard Sackler, I think, and John Milius also helped write that. And they all worked on it together. That's the great thing, and they honed it to make it what it was. And then they also interviewed some of the actual pilots that were actually in the water, and they didn't know that this was happening. They didn't know that this was going to be in the movie, but they saw the movie and they were in tears, and they were like, thank you for representing us. They weren't even allowed to talk about it for like 30 years or something like that. And so like things like that, like another actor or another pair of actors, would they have been able to create that moment? It's magic. Like it's hard to, you never know, and it doesn't always work, and I think it works. It works magically in there.
Definitely the best part of the movie. One other thing I was gonna say, I personally didn't think that the shark looked all that fake. I thought, watching it now, I was like, you know, that looks pretty good. Even knowing that we have better technology now, I actually prefer a physical puppet or a machine to a CGI, because sometimes CGIs look amazing and you really can't tell it is, but other times it's so obvious that it really takes you out of it. You're like, there's more computer animation. There's just something about having them interact with a real thing that's just so much more authentic and more interesting. And I'm more impressed with the idea that they had to build this machine and try to make it work with all the problems they had to deal with, as opposed to somebody who made it in the computer. I know it's a lot of work to do computer animation. I went to school for that. I didn't get a degree or anything, but I understand that's a lot of work to do that too. But it's a different element. It's like 2D versus 3D. There's just a different skill set when you're doing 2D animation versus 3D. And I think I'm just more into the more, to me, I feel like 2D is more dynamic. I know that can sound weird because 3D is more realistic, but it also feels fake, even though it looks real. There's some part of me that knows it's not real. And I just know there's something just so much more dynamic about a physical thing or something. Some of the things they did in the past were more effective or were more interesting than what we're doing now.
Isn't it funny how each subsequent Jaws movie, and it could be like you're talking about, Ray, they showed it too much, but each shark looks progressively more fake. I don't know. Shouldn't technology improve?
Better. Well, yeah. But
it looks worse and worse.
B-movie as they go. Like, I've never watched the other ones, but I've heard that the 3 is really...
No, don't. But you have a movie like Deep Blue Sea that has CGI sharks, and it's just not as impressed. They move like CGI sharks. There's nothing. So the physicality, it's like Puppet Yoda versus CG. I'd rather have the puppet because at least I know it's there.
Yeah.
touch, it's tangible.
So
Anyway.
I was going to mention, you mentioned art and the digital design and stuff. The storyboard images. So first of all, they actually used one of them for the t-shirt. The t-shirt that is the big open mouth of Jaws. That's one of their storyboard images. But they're amazing. I work at a print shop, and when I saw those, I was like, I would take prints of those right now. How do I get that right now? Like, and I told Scott that. I'm like, we always talk about like, oh, we should display art. I'm just fuzzed out right now. But we have exactly one picture hanging up, and it's a map. Like, it's like not even a picture. And we always talk about putting stuff in the background so it's not just a blank wall, or I'm not blurring it out or whatever. And I'm like, 100%, I'm just gonna line the walls with the storyboard images from Jaws. And he's like, not in my office. Like,
Well, it's my office too now, so
I was like, okay, I'll just put it in our bedroom. Like, that's fine.
I'll take it down when well, no one's he does a podcast, right? Like, nobody sees his office, so like, why is that a problem for him? I don't understand. So Darren, thank you so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Definitely a book I wouldn't have read if we hadn't been doing this. So that's what my favorite part about doing this is. I'm broadening my horizons and reading more books that I probably never would have. So that's fun. I love your podcast. I think it's very well edited, and I really think that your co-star. I mean, there's something about that guy. He's real cute.
You think so? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
He
I mean,
definitely thinks so.
The other guy is okay.
Yeah, whatever.
But yeah, so NostalgiaCast. Everyone, go and watch it. They're up and coming, and they're getting better all the time, and it's just a lot of fun watching the two of you talk, and with your guests and everything.
We can only aspire to be you and Rae, so hopefully one day we'll get there.
Not everybody's as awesome as us, but
that's right.
Yeah.
But and I'm super excited to hear the next book that you're gonna. That's my favorite part of listening to you. But Johnny will kill me if he doesn't. I'm supposed to introduce our newest season that we're supposed to be starting. And speaking of The Godfather, we're covering 70s movies, so it's nice we're able to talk Jaws and New Hollywood. And so we're just good segue. We're starting our new season probably the middle of this month, probably before Thanksgiving. But our first episode is The Godfather. And you'll have to tune in to find out whether I think The Godfather or The Godfather Part 2 is better, especially with watching the recent.
That's why I know whether those two are good, because I was watching it with Johnny. So
there you go. So so we're going to be talking about all these 70 and how exciting it was to be part of that movement and just reclaiming what movies were and what they were supposed to be after. Again, movies and cinema goes in waves, and the 70s was an exciting time. So we're looking forward to starting.
Yeah.
Waves. Did you like that pun? I didn't even think of that.
You're funny. So yeah, Rae, what is your choice of book next? What are we doing next time?
So I'm kind of going meat and potatoes. Well, for me anyway, with The Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of Oz. Okay. I've actually never read those. So
it's the Frank L. Baum, right?
I think so.
Which is funny because I actually I'm not a fan of the movie Wizard of Oz. But I appreciate Wizard of Oz. So I'm not an idiot. I appreciate what it means to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so I've got some opinions, and then so anyway, I've never watched Wizard of Oz with any kind of critical mind. So
okay, cool. I don't think my kids have ever watched it all the way through, so it'll be fun. I'll make them watch with me and see their reaction to it, because they're little mini film critics, so that'll be fun. All right, well, thanks again, Darren, for coming, and everybody.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for NostalgiaCast season 5. Is it 5?
Sure.
Yeah, I should
episode
know,
90,
but...
right?
What was that?
Episode 90.
Yeah. Episode we just did an episode, just a Halloween episode, really quick on Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Yep.
So episode 90 will be the start of our new season. Yep. So everybody check us out. Everybody keep checking Paperback Flicks out. Great podcast. I appreciate you two having me on.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, Aaron.